They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but the one sitting on my mantle, the one right there in the heavy silver frame, it's worth 1,000 lies. It was taken Christmas, 1998. Look at us.
I'm wearing a three-piece suit, standing tall, hand resting firmly on my son's shoulder. My wife, Eleanor, is seated in front, her hair perfectly coiffed, a string of pearls around her neck that cost more than my father made in a lifetime. To the neighbors, to the church congregation, even to my law partners, this was the definition of the American dream: success, stability, love. But if you look closer, if you really look, you can see the truth that I was too blind, or perhaps too sedated, to see back then. Look at Eleanor's hand gripping the armrest of that chair. Her knuckles are white, straining as if she's bracing for a car crash. And my son, David, he isn't looking at the camera. He's looking sideways at me. And there is no admiration in his eyes, only a quiet, terrifying vigilance. He was checking to see if I was going to sway. He was checking to see if the perfect father was about to stumble. You see, everyone thought I was the pillar of this family, the rock they could lean on. But in that moment, and in thousands of moments before it, I was already gone. I was physically there, smelling of expensive cologne and peppermints, but my soul was drowning in a sea of aged scotch. I thought I was holding the family together, but I was the wrecking ball they were all desperately trying to survive. I didn't drink in dive bars. I didn't stumble down the streets singing songs or picking fights. No, my ritual was far more civilized, and because of that, it was far more sinister. It always happened at exactly 5:15 p.m., right there in the driveway. The engine would cut off, the heavy garage door would slide down, sealing me in, just me in the silence of a luxury sedan. I would reach into my briefcase, pushing past the important legal briefs and court documents until my fingers found the cool metal of the silver flask tucked deep in the leather pocket. 2 long, burning pulls. That was the prescription. Just enough to numb the sharp edges of the day. Just enough to lower the volume of the world so I could walk through that front door and play the part of the gentle, patient husband. I told myself I was doing it for them. I convinced myself that without the whiskey I would be irritable. I would bring the stress of the firm into the kitchen. The alcohol made me smile when I wanted to scream. It made me nod politely when I wanted to be left alone. I would wipe my mouth, pop a strong peppermint, and check my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. The eyes that stared back weren't glassy. They were dead calm. I thought I was composing myself. I didn't realize I was erasing myself. And then, the final step, the turn of the key in the front door lock. Click. That sound. God, that sound. I didn't know it then, but that metallic click was the trigger for my family to stop breathing. The dining room was always warm, smelling of rosemary and roasted chicken, but sitting at the head of that mahogany table felt like being underwater. Everything moved in slow motion. This was the hardest part of the charade, the interaction. I was a master of the functioning part of my addiction. I could recite statutes and case law in my sleep, but actual human connection required an energy I simply didn't have. Eleanor would ask about the firm, her voice tight, probing for cracks. David would start a story about his soccer practice, his eyes darting to me, desperate for a reaction, a laugh, a frown, anything real. But the whiskey had wrapped my brain in thick, soft cotton. It buffered the noise. It buffered the love. I would slice my steak with surgical precision, cutting perfectly square bites, and say, "That sounds fine, David," without ever lifting my eyes from my plate. I wasn't slurring my words. I wasn't spilling my drink. I was just empty, a hollow shell of a man occupying a chair. I thought that because I wasn't yelling, I was a good father. I thought that because I was providing the food on the table, I was doing my job. I didn't realize that while I was feeding their bodies, I was starving them of the one thing they actually needed: me. The silence that filled the gaps in our conversation wasn't peaceful, as I had convinced myself. It was heavy, suffocating, and cold as the grave. The turning point didn't come with the crash of my car, but with the crash of my son's body against the pavement. It was a Tuesday evening. David was 12. He had been climbing the old oak tree in the backyard when a branch snapped. I was in my study, working, which was just a euphemism for nursing a tumbler of bourbon, when I heard the scream. It was a sound that should have ripped a father's soul apart. Eleanor was out the back door in seconds, shrieking, hysterical. When I got there, David was on the grass, his arm twisted at a sickening angle, bone pressing against skin. A normal father would have dropped to his knees. A normal father would have been terrified. But I was chemically insulated. The alcohol had built a dam that held back every drop of adrenaline. I didn't run, I walked. While Eleanor sobbed and tried to comfort him, I stood over them, looking down with the detached curiosity of a coroner. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. My voice was steady, flat, efficient. I gave the address, I described the injury. I even told Eleanor to lower her voice because she was making it difficult for the operator to hear me. I thought I was being the Rock. I thought I was being the hero who kept his head while everyone else lost theirs. But in the ambulance, I didn't hold David's hand. I sat opposite him, checking my watch, annoyed that this was going to ruin my evening schedule. I looked up and saw David staring at me through his tears. He wasn't looking for comfort anymore. He was looking at me like I was a stranger, like I was a machine. That was the night I lost him. He realized that his pain couldn't touch me, because nothing could. After that night, the papers weren't signed, no lawyers were called, but make no mistake, Eleanor divorced me. It was a silent separation, executed within the walls of our own home. They stopped asking me for help. They stopped telling me about their days. I became a ghost haunting my own hallways. When I walked into the living room, the conversation would die instantly, replaced by a polite, suffocating tension. David retreated into his headphones. Eleanor retreated into her charity work. We became roommates who shared a zip code and a bank account, but nothing else. And the most terrifying part? I was relieved. Yes, relieved. Because their distance meant I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to expend that precious energy feigning interest or empathy. I could retreat to my study, lock the door, and pour the scotch without judgment. I told myself I was the martyr, the hard-working provider who was misunderstood. I pay for this roof, I'd muttered to the glass in my hand. I pay for their clothes, their schools. What more do they want? I convinced myself that my money was a substitute for my soul. I didn't realize that by locking that study door, I wasn't keeping the world out. I was locking myself in a coffin of my own making. The explosion didn't happen at the dinner table. It happened in the fluorescent-lit parking lot of the county jail. David was 17. He'd been picked up for street racing and resisting arrest. I didn't panic. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply made a few calls, wrote a substantial check, and had the charges dropped. I was the fixer. As we walked to the car, I didn't ask him why he did it. I didn't ask if he was okay. I just looked at him with that same practiced, boozy calm and said, "You are an embarrassment to this family. You are acting like a loser." I expected him to hang his head. Instead, he stopped. He turned to me, and for the first time in his life, he didn't look afraid. He looked disgusted. He screamed, his voice cracking with teenage rage. "A loser? At least I feel something. At least when I drive fast, I feel alive. You? You're dead, Dad. You've been dead for 10 years. I tried to interrupt, to use my courtroom voice, but he cut me off. "Don't think we don't know." He spat the words out like venom. The flask in the briefcase, the bottles behind the encyclopedias in the study. Mom knows. I know. We all know. You think you're hiding? You're just a drunk in a $2,000 suit. That sentence hit me harder than any fist. The glass wall I had built shattered. My secret wasn't a secret. My high-functioning life was just a pitiful open joke to the people I was supposed to be leading. It didn't happen all at once. There was no slamming of doors, no final screaming match. It was a slow, agonizing fade. David went to college on the other side of the country and simply forgot to call. Eleanor, she didn't pack her bags in a rage. She simply moved into the guest room, then to her sister's for a weekend, and then out of my life completely. I remember standing in the foyer, watching the movers take her piano. I held a glass of scotch in my hand, swirling the amber liquid, telling myself, finally, peace and quiet. And I got it. God, did I get it. The house became a museum of my success. The marble floors shone, the art on the walls was exquisite, and the silence was so loud it made my ears ring. I sat in my leather armchair, my throne, surrounded by the finest vintage wines money could buy. I had reached the pinnacle of my career. I was the managing partner. I was respected. I was functioning at the highest level. But at night, wandering through those 12 empty rooms, I finally solved the terrible math of my addiction. I had traded the messy, loud, chaotic warmth of love for the cold, sterile comfort of the bottle. I wasn't a king ruling over an empire. I was a prisoner in a gilded cage, and I had swallowed the key with every sip. I have been sober for 5 years now. The doctors told me my liver was failing, but that wasn't why I stopped. I stopped because I ran out of reasons to hide. But here is the brutal truth they don't tell you in support groups. Sobriety didn't bring my family back. It just gave me the clarity to see exactly what I destroyed. Every morning, I sit at this same mahogany table, eating toast in silence, looking at the empty chair where David used to sit and the empty chair where Eleanor used to smile. The silence is no longer a relief. It is a scream that never ends. So, to the men out there, to the high-functioning fathers who think a glass of scotch or a pill is the only way to handle the noise of family life, listen to me. You are not protecting them. You are erasing yourself. You think you are sacrificing for their future, but you are stealing their present. They don't want your money. They don't want your reputation. They want your eyes. They want you to look at them and actually see them, not through a haze of chemicals, but with the raw, messy, painful clarity of real love. Don't wait until the house is quiet
To realize how loud your life should have been. Don't be the ghost at the head of the table. Because let me tell you, being a legend in the courtroom means nothing when you are a stranger in your own home.